The blade was already moving before I had time to think, and somewhere above my head, a small red light blinked out the words that were supposed to keep me safe. Do not engage. That was the warning the scanner had given the whole room a moment earlier, and now the very same warning felt like a joke that nobody in this training hall was laughing at anymore. My name is Ellie Hart. I was the only human standing on that sparring floor, inside a training station built by a species called the Threll, who stood 3 times my height and had never lost a single formal match against anyone from their own kind. I had traveled farther than any person I knew, just to stand in this room, and for one long, breathless second, I wondered if I had made the worst decision of my life. The Threll are warriors before they are anything else. Their bodies are covered in natural plating that can turn away a blade without a scratch. Their limbs are built for force, not finesse. When they fight, they do not waste time on subtlety, because subtlety has never been necessary for a species that has never met anything faster than itself. That is, until humans arrived. I had been the only person from Earth accepted into this academy, and not because anyone wanted me there. My scores on the entrance trials had been high enough that the system had no lawful way to turn me away. The instructors were furious about it in a quiet way, the kind of anger that does not shout, but waits patiently for a reason to prove itself right. That reason was standing in front of me now. His name was Draeth, and he had trained soldiers for longer than my entire life had existed. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His presence alone was enough to make the room feel smaller. 3 days earlier, when I had first walked onto this floor, a small drone had scanned my body from head to toe and displayed its judgment above me for everyone to see. Classification, it had said. Do not engage. It was not a warning meant to protect me. It was an insult dressed up as a safety measure, because the machine had been built to measure plating and mass, and I had neither. To the scanner, I looked less like a fighter and more like something that had wandered into the wrong room by accident. The other cadets had laughed. It was a strange clicking sound, dozens of mandibles moving at once, and it had echoed off the walls long after the moment should have passed. I remembered standing there, feeling every inch of how small and soft I must have looked to them, and deciding, quietly, that laughter was something I could survive. Now, 3 days later, the same scanner had run its little test again before the match, and the very same words had appeared above my head. Do not engage. Only this time, Draeth had looked at that warning, looked at me, and said something that made the whole room go still. The machine is being generous, he had said. Step forward, human. So I had stepped forward, and now his blade was already in motion, and I understood that whatever happened in the next second would decide far more than just one match. I want to explain something about people from Earth, because it matters here more than anywhere else. We are not the strongest species in this part of the galaxy. We do not have natural armor. Our bodies bruise easily. Our bones break more easily than most. And if you compared us on paper to almost any warrior race we have met so far, we would lose. What we do have, though, is something that took 200,000 years to build. Back when our ancestors were small, soft creatures, being hunted by animals that were faster and stronger than they were. We learned to read the moment before danger arrived. Not the strike itself, but the breath before it, the shift of weight, the small, almost invisible signal that tells you exactly where something is about to go, a fraction of a second before it gets there. The Threll had never needed to learn that. For 4,000 years, nothing on their homeworld had been quick enough to force them to. Their whole way of fighting was built on the idea that whatever stood in front of them would simply fail to survive the impact. It was a doctrine written by a species that had never once needed to be clever about staying alive. Draeth's shoulder dropped, and I saw the shift of weight roll back onto his rear leg, the way it always does in every living creature I had ever studied, right before a full committed strike. It was the same signal, the same half-second, no matter what species stood in front of me. The blade came down in a long vertical arc, and every cadet in the room understood that this was the same opening strike shown to every new student in their first week, meant to be blocked, meant to be turned aside, never meant to be simply received by something as fragile as me. I did not try to stop it. Stopping 400 pounds of trained muscle head-on was never going to work, and I had known that the moment I stepped onto the floor. Instead, I let my body do the only thing that had ever kept people like me alive against something bigger. I moved just enough. My palm met the flat of the practice blade at an angle, redirecting its path by only a few degrees. Just enough that the weight of the strike slid past me instead of through me. It was not strength that made it work. It was timing. And timing was the one thing the scanner had never been built to measure. The room went completely silent. It is a strange thing to notice silence from a species that laughs in sharp little clicks, but you notice it immediately once it stops. Draeth did not move for a long moment. When he finally did, his mandibles clicked once, then twice, but it was not the sound of laughter this time. It was something closer to a mind working quickly to recalculate everything it had assumed only a minute earlier. "The scanner reads plating," he said slowly. "It reads mass. It does not read this." My palm had already started to ache from the impact, and I knew it would carry a mark for days, training blade or not. But I kept my voice steady, because that is another thing people from Earth learn early. We have had a long time to practice not showing what something costs us. "Run the scanner again," I said. "See what it says now." Nobody laughed that time. The little drone rolled forward on its worn wheels and passed its beam of light over me a second time. It seemed to hesitate, though machines are not supposed to hesitate, and then it displayed a single new line above my head for the entire room to see. Classification recalculating. Draeth lowered his blade and looked around the room at cadets who, 3 days earlier, had quietly guessed how many days I would last before giving up and going home. The machine was never built to measure a species that survives by thinking through the moment it should already be finished, he said. "All of you will adjust what you assume, starting today." I did not win that match by any formal scoring system used at that academy. It did not matter. What mattered was that the room finally understood the truth behind those 3 words on the scanner. "Do not engage" had never been a judgment about what I was capable of. It had been a warning about what the machine could not see coming. The days that followed were different in ways I had not expected. The laughter stopped, but something else took its place that felt almost harder to carry. Cadets who had ignored me completely now watched every move I made in the training hall, studying me the way you study a puzzle you are not sure how to solve. One of them, a young cadet named Daniel, who had transferred from a smaller academy on the outer stations, began showing up early to the sparring floor just to watch how I moved before anyone else arrived. He was not Threll, he was human too, though he had trained at a different facility for 2 years before requesting a transfer here. And he told me later that hearing about my match had been the reason he asked to come. He said the story had already spread through 3 different training stations by the time it reached him, twisted and exaggerated with each retelling, until people were saying I had broken the blade in half with my bare hand, which was not true and never had been. I told him the real version, because exaggeration never helps anyone train properly. I told him about the shoulder drop, the shift of weight, the half-second before the strike that the Threll had simply never needed to notice before now. He listened carefully, the way someone listens when they know the information might keep them alive later. Draeth changed too, though not in the way I expected. He did not go easy on me. If anything, the sessions became harder, longer, filled with drills that left my arms shaking by the end of each day. But he stopped calling me human in that flat, dismissive tone he had used during our first meeting. He started using my name instead, and among a species that measured respect in small, careful signals, that shift meant more than any formal praise could have. One evening, after a long session that had left most of the room empty and quiet, Draeth stayed behind while the others filed out. He stood near the edge of the sparring floor, watching me gather my things, and for a long moment he said nothing at all. Then he told me something I had not expected to hear. He said that when he was young, still training under his own instructor, an old Threll warrior had once told him that no species survives forever by being the strongest one in the room. Eventually, he said, something faster comes along, and the only species that survive that moment are the ones who had already learned how to notice the warning signs long before the danger arrived. He had not understood what that meant at the time, he admitted. He had assumed it was about training harder, building thicker plating, developing stronger limbs. It was only after watching me stop his blade with one open hand that he understood the old warrior had meant something else entirely. He had meant exactly the kind of thinking that took 200,000 years to build in a species that had never once been the strongest thing in its own world. I did not know what to say to that, so I simply nodded, and he seemed to understand that some moments do not need more words attached to them. Weeks passed, and the academy slowly changed around me in small, quiet ways. The scanner at the entrance to the sparring hall was eventually replaced with a newer model, one that measured more than plating and mass. Nobody announced the change publicly, but everyone on the training floor understood exactly why it had happened. New cadets arrived over the following months, some from other human settlements scattered across the growing network of stations that made up our small, fragile presence among these older, stronger species. Each of them walked onto that sparring floor, expecting the same laughter I had faced during my first week. Instead, they found cadets who already knew better than to trust a scanner that could not measure timing. I began helping train some of the newer arrivals myself, not because anyone asked me to, but because I remembered exactly how it had felt standing alone, under those blinking red words with no one in the room willing to meet my eyes. A young woman named Claire arrived from one of the newer colony stations, nervous and unsure of herself, convinced that her small frame would be nothing but a disadvantage in a room built for giants. I told her the same thing Draeth had eventually come to understand about me. Size was never the whole story. It had never been the whole story for any species that survived long enough to matter. She struggled at first, the way everyone does when they are learning to trust a kind of thinking that goes against everything their instincts tell them to do when something large and fast is moving toward them. It takes real effort to stay calm enough to read a half-second of warning instead of simply flinching away from danger. But she kept coming back, day after day, and slowly her timing began to sharpen the same way mine had. Word of the training station reached back to some of the other Concord worlds eventually, carried by traders and travelers who had passed through and watched a session or two out of curiosity. Some of it was accurate, much of it was not, the way stories tend to grow and shift the farther they travel from where they actually happened. But underneath all the exaggeration, one detail always stayed the same in every version I heard repeated back to me. A scanner had marked a human as something to be dismissed, and that human had proven, in the space of a single second, exactly how wrong a machine could be when it only knew how to measure the things it had been built to see. Draeth was asked once, by a visiting instructor from another academy, whether he regretted the harsh way he had treated new cadets during their first week of training. He said he did not, because harshness had never been the point. The point had always been finding out, as quickly as possible, what a cadet was truly capable of, long before the real danger of a battlefield made that discovery for them instead. He said the difference with me had never been the harshness itself. It had been that I had shown him something his training had never prepared him to expect, and he had been willing to notice it instead of dismissing it the way the scanner had. I thought about that conversation for a long time afterward. It would have been easy for him to hold on to his first assumption, to decide that one unusual match had been luck rather than skill, and to continue treating every human cadet who followed me the same dismissive way I had first been treated. Instead, he had chosen to update what he believed, in front of an entire room of cadets who respected him deeply, which is a harder thing for anyone to do than people often give credit for. By the time my first full year at the academy came to an end, the sparring hall looked different from the place I had first walked into. There were more human cadets training alongside the Threll now, more instructors who had learned to watch for the small signals that machines still struggled to read. The old scanner sat in a storage room somewhere, replaced and mostly forgotten, though I sometimes thought about that first blinking warning it had given me, and wondered if some small part of that mistake had ended up mattering more than any single match ever could have on its own. Daniel finished his training around the same time I did, and Claire was close behind him, both of them far more confident than the nervous cadets who had first walked onto that floor months earlier. We did not talk often about that first match anymore. It had become something the whole station already knew, retold so many times that it no longer needed explaining. But every so often, a new cadet would arrive, freshly scanned, freshly warned by a machine that still did not fully understand what it was looking at, and the story would get told again, this time by someone other than me. I left the academy eventually, the way every cadet does once their training reaches its natural end, but I carried something with me that no scanner could have measured on the day I first arrived. It was not strength, and it was not speed. It was the simple, hard-won understanding that being underestimated is not the same as being weak, and that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the room is the person nobody thought to take seriously in the first place. Years later, I heard that the academy still told the story to every new class of cadets during their first week, right before the scanner ran its test on each of them in turn. I do not know exactly how the story is told now, or how much of it has shifted and grown in the retelling, the way stories always do. But I like to imagine that somewhere in that sparring hall, a nervous new cadet is standing under a blinking warning light right now, feeling exactly the way I once felt, and that somewhere close by, an instructor who remembers my name is about to tell them exactly why that warning might not mean what they think it means.